This is the VOA Special English Education Report. More than 40 of the 50 American states have approved what are known as the Common Core State Standards. These are lists of content that students are supposed to learn at each grade level from kindergarten to high school. State governors and schools chiefs led the effort to develop the standards. The project involved teachers, administrators, experts, and public comments. The final standards were released in June of 2010. Acceptance is voluntary, but acceptance helped states that entered President Obama's $4 billion Race to the Top competition for school reform. The standards are for English language arts and math. Supporters say these provide clear goals to prepare students to succeed in college and in jobs. But critics of national standards say the idea goes against one of America's oldest traditions, local control of education. Political conservatives generally oppose federal intervention in schools. Yet it was a Republican President, George W. Bush, who expanded testing requirements to show that public schools are making yearly progress. Still, opponents of national standards call them one-size-fits-all. They say the idea does not make sense for a country as large and diverse as the United States. One of those opponents is Bill Evers at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University in California. He was an assistant education secretary under President Bush. Mr. Evers warns about closing the door on innovation by locking in a national uniform bureaucratic system. He says the states don't have a problem in setting their curriculum. They've been doing it ever since there have been public schools. Richard Riley was Education Secretary to President Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Mr. Riley says conservatives would be concerned if we had federal mandated Common Core standards. That's not what we have. It's a state-driven measure. High standards, challenging work for young people across the country. Mr. Riley says in the 1990s, he pushed states to develop their own statewide standards. But some of those standards were not very strong, he says, so he believes national standards are needed. But Bill Evers says technology now makes it easier to develop individual learning plans for students. He says schools should worry less about a common curriculum and more about improving teacher quality. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find a link to the Common Core Standards at voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Last week, we talked about the conflict between sleepy teenagers and early morning classes. Many people commented on our website and Facebook page. For example, Damla Ece in Turkey wrote, "I agree with the idea of starting lessons later so teenagers can feel better in the morning. But sleeping more than 7 hours can be wasting time for students." Tron in Vietnam disagreed. "I think teenagers, on the average, need 8 to 10 hours of sleep every day. It's useless trying to force them to concentrate while they can't concentrate." Enilton Nemakes in Brazil goes to sleep late and wakes up in the afternoon and wrote, "That's my life, but at least I am studying." Afshin Haydari from Tehran says schools should start early to avoid heavy traffic later in the morning. And Susie from Jordan wrote, "When I was a teenager, I enjoyed taking my courses as early as possible. That way, I could find a long time in the day to do my own activities." But Azra from Kyrgyzstan said the reason schools start early there is a lack of classrooms. Omid in Afghanistan calls teenagers the destiny makers of a society, so they must be more alert and active in order to be more successful. And Joruji in Japan wrote, "When I was a teenager, I used to get up before 6 to go to school, which was far from home, and I don't remember having problems. I think nowadays the internet, TV, games, and cell phones make teens go to sleep later." 30-year-old Kika in Spain says, "In my opinion, young people are very lazy." But Dennis Jin disagrees. He says for high school students in China, we must reach class at 6:20 in the morning and be back home usually at 10 in the evening. Then we'll have some extra schoolwork to do. Teenagers are not the only ones who suffer. Kathy in Canada wrote, "My daughter likes complaining about everything in the morning, and I know that this is from lack of sleep. I wish schools should change their start time to 8:30 or 9 a.m. Vidara Mom, a Cambodian living in New Zealand, says school starts at 9 and finishes at 3 p.m. Therefore, the students have heaps of time to interact and play before they go home." Wibi Sebastian from Indonesia wishes school started at 7:30 instead of 7, but tells students don't forget to eat breakfast. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Teachers and parents usually call attention to the pictures when they read storybooks to preschool children. But a study published in 2011 suggests that calling attention to the words and letters on the page may help a child's reading. The 2-year study compared children who were read to this way in class with children who were not. The children whose teachers most often discussed the print showed clearly higher skills in reading, spelling, and understanding. These results were found 1 year and even 2 years later. Shane Piasta at Ohio State University was an author of the study. She said most preschool teachers would find this method manageable and would need only a small change in the way they teach. They already read storybooks in class. The only difference would be increased attention to the printed text. If you get children to pay attention to letters and words, it makes sense they would do better at word recognition and spelling. But research suggests that very few parents and teachers do this in a systematic way. The report appeared in the journal Child Development. More than 300 children ages 4 and 5 were observed for the study. The children came from poor families and were below average in their language skills. There are different ways that adults can talk to children about print. They can point to a letter and discuss it, and even trace the shape with a finger. They can point out a word. They can discuss the meaning of the print or how the words tell the story. And they can talk about the organization of the print. For instance, showing how words are written left to right in English. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. It was not just another day in a classroom recently for some young people in Washington, D.C. These student volunteers visited the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History to test a new program. Some students explored the mysteries of human bones. Other students examined an insect under a microscope. The student volunteers were among the first to help test a new exhibit, a new showing at the museum. The program has an unusual name, spoken as Curious and written as Q?RIUS. The exhibits are designed so young people can learn about science by taking part in experiments. The program combines the newest technologies and scientific equipment with more than 6,000 museum objects, both real and digital. Students from local schools helped develop the exhibit, which combines science and art. Teachers will bring their science students to the exhibit in the mornings. In the afternoons, the exhibits will be open to everyone. Many of the students already have their favorite activities at the center. 13-year-old Nate said he liked exploring the containers with dinosaur bones. Addie is 12 years old. She liked the bee display. She found that the bumblebee and the yellow bumblebee were very different when she examined them under a microscope. Another student, Ben, said he enjoyed an exhibit that lets people use their senses to learn. He said, for example, that a butterfly smells a little like tea. Involving the senses, smell, touch, hearing, is one of the exhibit's major goals. Curious can also be found online. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report in Special English. Speaking Kurdish was a crime in Turkey until about 20 years ago. More recently, the government has eased some of its restrictions on the use of the language. Now, the government is letting some schools offer Kurdish language classes. Halil Chechen teaches beginning Kurdish to medical students at Dicala University in southeastern Turkey. He says people are happy about the changes that are now being put into place. But he says people have been waiting a long time, 50 or 60 years. One student says he welcomes the classes. He speaks only a little Kurdish, he says, and he sees the classes as a big step, but they are only the beginning. He thinks learning Kurdish should be required, especially in health education. He says it would be even more successful if Kurdish were taught starting at a young age. The university is in the mostly Kurdish city of Diyarbakir. It is not far from the border with Syria. Syrian Kurds seized control of their region from Syrian government forces earlier this year. Now, children are learning Kurdish as a first language. Kurds in neighboring Iraq have had that right for years. But Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently rejected calls for Kurdish education in the mother tongue. He called it a terrorist demand of the Kurdish rebel group known as the PKK. The Prime Minister says there is no such thing as education in the mother tongue. He says the country's official language is Turkish. Kurdish politicians face increasing pressure if they violate language restrictions. But the Kurdish language and culture are increasingly making their presence felt. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.